Shall we start with all the times throughout history that hair colour, conversations about hair colour have been a precursor to, I don't know, apartheid, genocide, enslavement? Because it's just woke, isn't it, to pretend that conversations about skin colour are any different? Or could we imagine how the world would be responding if Meghan Markle was actually a statue of an old dead dude rather than a real-life living pregnant person? I don't know. And like you, I don't care. But I do. It's so weird, isn't it? It's so English. I care a lot. I can't wait to get stuck into this conversation. And I also recognise how, in many ways, how ridiculous it is. I will stress first and foremost the seriousness of one central piece of this astonishing interview, and that is a person has spoken about suicidal ideation. They've spoken about being in so much pain that they considered ending their own life. And some of the people who caused that pain have called her a liar. Now, do you know, someone sent a little thing out this morning, and it showed that the Mail Online had 31 stories running at the top of its banner. 30 of them were about Harry and Meghan, and the other one was about the late Caroline Flack. And I thought that there was a horrible irony to that situation, because here we are again looking at a young woman in the public eye who divides opinion, but who has spoken of her suffering and vulnerability only to be accused of lying, which is, of course, what abusers always do. Abusers do two things. They deny that they're abusers, and they accuse their victims of lying. And, of course, some people then join in with what is called victim blaming and say, well, she brought it on herself. Why didn't she leave him? Should have seen this coming a mile off. Strange, isn't it? So I'm very conscious of that serious side, and maybe when we've all watched the full interview, we could dig a little deeper into some of those elements. But listen, like everybody else in the British media, I have no insight or knowledge of the royal family. I have absolutely zero personal... except maybe Tom Bradby. Is he still at ITN? He was mates with them, I think. So he knows them. He has some insights, but of course he'd be persona non grata by tea time today if he were to reveal anything indiscreet or anything that they didn't want to be revealed. But I think he can be fairly described as a confidant. Everybody else in the British media knows as much about these people as you do. Everybody else in the British media knows as much about what has gone on behind closed doors as you do. Everybody else in the British media is essentially not making it up as they go along, but just sort of dancing on a pinhead with a few little nuggets of knowledge gleaned from an interview that most of us haven't even seen yet. There is a rather delicious, I think you'd call it a prank, that emerged over the weekend of 4 prominent, quotes, royal experts, end quotes, being persuaded to contribute to a fictional television programme to be broadcast immediately after the interview, which required them to, well, I think it's fair to say, to pretend for money that they'd seen the interview, and we may be catching up with the pranksters responsible for that a little later in the programme. Stick around, because there are, as I keep stressing, and I'm not going to get hung up on it, there are a lot of silly elements to this story, albeit the most serious one, and of course the racism. A member of the royal family expressing concern about how dark baby Archie might be, how dark his skin might. Why would you be concerned about that? Again, let's wait and see what's in the case, and focus instead on. See, my defence against accusations that I'm just as bad as everybody else is that we're meta. You see, on this programme, we rise above the toing and froing and the rival absurdities, and we focus instead upon the bigger picture. We like to step back from events and ironically comment upon them in a postmodern way. We are not members of the battle. We do not have skin in the game. I stress again, I have absolutely no personal knowledge of this couple or any of their relatives beyond what I have seen written by people who also have no knowledge or personal insight into this couple or any of their family members. So what question do we start with today? I mean, I'm interested partly in why do we care so much? It's a weird one, isn't it? If you allow me to properly lay out the question and keep the context in mind at all times. I'd like to use this interview to wonder how we would explain having a royal family to somebody recently arrived here from Alpha Centauri. You know, why do we care so much? Why do we have a royal family in this shape and form in the 21st century? I don't like asking that question, though, because of my own cognitive dissonance. You know, I don't think anyone would describe me as a forelock tugger, but I feel an odd regard and affection for the Queen. I know you're laughing at me. I know. So we could take the boy out of public school. We can't take the public school out of. I didn't used to have it. I think I was quite Republican when I came here, and in many ways I still am. But the problem with public life, and this is what actually Kate and Harry, crikey, that'd be a story, wouldn't it? This is what Meghan and Harry sum up probably perfectly, is the gulf between the public and the personal. I think some people have been very vile, particularly about Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. I mean, truly vile. You remember when we compare those headlines about everything from her wedding bouquet to her penchant for avocados, and when the Duchess of Cambridge behaved in, and the key word is identical. When the Duchess of Cambridge did something identical, it was written up like Mills and Boon. When the Duchess of Sussex did the identical thing, it was written up like Dante's Inferno. I mean, it was as she had personally constructed the seventh circle of hell and invited the entire country to join her in it. You think I'm exaggerating? I may have to go back to the tape and dig out those stories again. The 20 BuzzFeed did it, if you want to find it for yourself. The 20 had everything from her wedding bouquet to avocados. Just unbelievable contrast in how she was treated by the media. Remember, I'm a member of the media, but I'm also not. I'm not on newspapers anymore. If I was, I think and also my heart isn't on Fleet Street anymore. My heart is here with you guys. Yeah? Okay? Yeah? I'm a radio presenter first, probably a friend second. But genuinely, I don't feel any loyalty to the old Fleet Street values. And I know I'm not dishonest enough to say to you that I wouldn't, if I still worked there, if that was still the way I earned my crust, I'd probably have convinced myself of various things that I don't currently believe to be true. And they sum that up because, you know, there's the public and the personal. And to defend some of the people who've been vile to this young woman who ended up contemplating suicide, to be fair as one reasonably can be, it is very easy in this business to forget that someone in the public eye is actually a human being, a father or a son, a brother or a sister, you know, a genuine human being. So when you hear them talking about, it's like sport. Happened to be many, many, many years ago with the footballer Frank Lampard when I was describing his domestic travails on air, and his sister was listening, and he rang me in a state of high dudgeon, I mean high fury, and it was the first time since I'd been a showbiz editor that I found myself recognising that when we write about quotes people end quotes or talk about quotes people end quotes, we're not talking about people. We're talking about figures like totems or almost kind of, not parody's not the right word, but beyond. You don't you know when people always say if you're nervous, imagine the audience that you're talking to sitting on the toilet, and part of the reasoning behind that is that you just remember that we are all basically the same under the bonnet, right? And you forget that with famous people. You think that famous people must somehow be different from the rest of us. They must be tougher or bigger or wiser or dafter or whatever it may be. It's as if their feelings it's as if there's a trade that by stepping into the spotlight, by stepping into the public eye, the tabloid media in particular, and I speak as someone who was guilty of this, the tabloid media thinks that you have somehow sacrificed some of your humanity. You've given up some of your humanity. You can see it playing out very well in the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's case by the use of the word privacy. You know, this idea that they've stepped away from the royal family because they want privacy. That's not true. They've stepped away from the royal family and they've stepped away from Britain because of the distinction between consent and intrusion. They want to consent. They want media coverage that they consent to, right? Not media coverage that they don't consent to. So if I give an interview to The Observer, it doesn't mean that you can hide in my hedge taking pictures of me doing my morning yoga in my jockstrap. That obviously is not the invitation that I'm issuing, or indeed the relationship that I'm entering into. Contain your excitement at that mental image. So that's the problem here, is that they are trying to control the relationship between the public and the private. And I think they're probably on a hiding to nothing, to be honest with you. I don't think they can. But I think the race element of the conversation is obviously the one that's going to be seized upon. This poor pair are going to become part of this bogus culture war that is being blown up all around us in the hope of distracting people who think they're right-wing from the damage being done to their lives by right-wing politicians. It's genius, really. It's like Brexit times a million, and I'm afraid it's going to get a hell of a lot bigger before it goes away. And that seems to me to be where this whole interview will break down once we've finally seen it. People who don't recognise or perhaps even relish the institutional nature of racism will come away fuming. I know they're always fuming, but they'll be even more fuming than usual. People who do recognise the institutional nature of racism and the appalling discrimination that Meghan Markle has faced. That is one of the points Prince Harry makes when the family say to him, well, we all have to put up with this. And he says the racial element makes it different, and they don't get that. I mean, he's obviously just right, but they're not obviously just wrong. They're not aware. You can't. I mean, it's like culpability, isn't it? It's like malice aforethought. If you're aware of that what you're doing is nasty, it's a worse act than if you're not aware of how it could impact upon other people. So people who are aware of institutional racism, I think, are just going to come away sad and sympathetic. Don't you? I mean, what other reaction can you have? Either you'll start foaming at the mouth and screaming about denial and ginger hair, or if you're aware of institutional racism and indeed your role as a member of the media in it, then you just come away sad and sympathetic. I mean, it's heartbreaking. How many pregnant women could expect to reveal that they've had suicidal thoughts and then see the most powerful platforms in the United Kingdom dedicate page after page after page to attacking them? Which is what will happen. It's already started. You won't be surprised to learn I had to badger Ferrari for the late editions. He's always ahead of the game on this sort of thing. So the front of the Sun, Meg, I felt suicidal. I don't imagine there'll be much mention of the role that the Sun played in that process. That's how tabloid newspapers work. And the Mail, Kate made me cry. Meghan tells Oprah how row led to wedding tears. She married Harry in secret 3 days early. Royal officials lied to protect themselves, not me. That intrigues me. And then the concern about how dark Archie's skin might be. Okay, I am going to do it like this. You know, sometimes I like to pontificate for a period before I settle upon the question I'm going to ask you. If it annoys you, imagine how the poor producers feel. Seriously, it's like the worst nightmare from hell for a radio producer not to know what question the presenter's going to ask until he hits the first commercial break of the morning. So, come here a minute, all right? Because I'm talking directly to you now. I'm not doing a sort of big banner, come one, come all. I'm talking directly to you, right there, you. Don't ring me to say I don't. That's not an acceptable answer to this question. And ring me from any perspective of affection or disgust or anger or sympathy or sadness. That's fine. But you, why do you care? 0345 6060 973. Why do you care about this story, this couple, this conflict? 0345 6060 973. Don't tell me why other people care. Don't tell me why you don't care. Tell me why you personally care. 0345 6060 973. And while you reach for your phone, I'll try and work out whether I really do or not. Probably yet another consequence of me mellowing with age, as opposed to hardening, as it were, in prejudices and preconceptions. But I'm not having a pop at you today if you really, really care about this story, or if you really, really don't. I'm just wondering what it is that makes some of us care so much about, not the royal family in general, we may move on to that, but about this particularly sad chapter. And I mean, the weirdness probably kicks in where people take the conduct of public figures personally, but that's not confined to the royal family. You know, find a famous person, find even a very, very mildly famous person, and you will find people who take every dot and comma of their existence as a personal affront or tribute. You know, there are people who think that the way newsreaders sign off the news at the end of a bulletin is sending them a secret message intended only for them. So again, it's not confined to the royal family, but it's a question. I think this is the thing I'm most interested in today. I'm most interested in you, and I'm most interested in why you care. Rita is in Surbiton. Rita, why do you care?
James, I care because before Harry married Meghan, I didn't really care about the royal family. Everything, you know, all the undertones. When you're growing up I'm an Indian woman in the UK. We were ruled by Queen Victoria, so you always have the racial undertones, and they've always been distant. And I've always thought, they're racist. But when he married Meghan, I thought,
sorry, I just spluttered there. It's only partly performative. There's a racist history. Every
the undertones were always there.
But I never saw. Well, Prince Philip perhaps has said some ill-advised things, but now's not the time.
Wore all these sort of jewellery with.
But not the Queen, or indeed Prince Charles,
I'm not saying the Queen.
No.
The general undertone of that sort of.
Okay.
People who come from the royal family. So I was so happy when he married Meghan. And I thought it's the best thing that happened to the royal family, that people of colour now felt sort of accepted. To be honest with you, I really felt so happy.
Yes.
And now
so, okay, because I'm not entirely comfortable. I may well change my mind, so don't have a pop at me with the depiction of the modern royal family as being racist. But you're saying that as a woman of colour, they just had nothing to do with you.
Yeah, they had nothing to do with me. They were completely distant.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
And when he married this young lady, I was so proud of Harry for number one, for marrying him. And I didn't even know him. And I really feel proud of this young man.
Yes.
For standing up for his wife.
Okay.
He could have easily done the opposite, but he didn't. And he's really is a man of courage, and he's made his mother proud by that interview. And I'm going to.
You're setting me off now.
Yeah, because I want Harry to know how every single person of colour in this country is proud of him today for standing up for us.
Well, not every single person of colour. This is a radio phone, and it wouldn't be too hard to find somebody who would claim that asking questions about the darkness of the baby's skin was just the same about asking about freckles or ginger hair. I mean, it's not a position that stands up to much scrutiny, but it's one that people apparently hold.
And James, I was a young child when his mother passed away, and I didn't understand what was going on in the media and how people treated people that did things differently. Now I even understand, like, the Duke of Windsor was exiled to France because he married a divorcee.
Yes.
Not only did Harry marry a divorcee, he's married a divorcee and a woman of colour.
I mean, she was a commoner as well, of course, Mrs. Simpson. She was a commoner, which was also a problem. And I think that... Well, I guess so. But for me, and that's a great first call, actually, because you've set several dogs running. Or hares running, I think, is the correct phrase. For me, the problem is always created when they let the light in. This is the great contradiction at the heart of the younger royals in particular, because part of the reason for the Queen's enduring popularity is that we know almost nothing at all about her. All we know is the tip of the iceberg. All we know is what we see. All we know is the public service, the public life, the public duty. And the more we know, this is where Prince Charles probably broke the mould, because of the nature of media and because of surreptitiously recorded conversations in which he expressed a desire to be reincarnated as a sanitary product. When you find out that really deep down they're just like the rest of us, then the rationale for having a royal family gets shaken. You find out they're just as messed up, they're just as likely to fall out with each other, they're just as human, they're just as fallible, they're just as venal as the rest of us are, then you kind of run the risk of people asking, well, how come they get to drive around in golden carriages? So that maybe is part of the strength of reaction against them from within the royal family. It's the consciousness. I think they held up mirrors, you see, from what I've seen of this interview. I think they've held up massive, great mirrors to the royal family itself, to the British media in particular, and, of course, also to elements of our society. And so the uglier the reflection that you see in that mirror, the angrier you will be today. I think. I could be wrong. Rita, thank you. It's a perfect start. Dee's in Hackney. Dee, why do you care about all this so much?
You know what? I think you have to live it to sort of... You as you always say, you'd have to have a foot in the race.
Yes, something like that.
Nobody is ever going to admit I am a racist. I do not like black or white people. I
think Steve Bannon did, didn't he? Didn't Steve Bannon say people should start wearing it as a badge of honour? And, of course, the crossover between people who love Donald Trump and hate Meghan Markle is an astonishing coincidence, isn't it?
Absolutely, but you know what? If someone come up and stand up for their conviction, you could have more respect for them.
Well,
but everybody is hiding behind their Facebook, their internet, or their phone, whatever. I think they in this country there is a load of racists.
Well, of course there is. I mean, that's what institutional means.
Direction.
Yes. And it's
we've got bad history here. You know, it's like not just here.
Why do people have such a problem with that? There's a piece in the Mail today about how the Alton Towers, the stately home upon which the theme park was built, like a lot of stately homes, the money that was needed to build that stately home came in part from slave plantations, and there are historic organisations that want to publish more of that history, and the Daily Mail has a 2-page hissy fit today. Why do people get so upset about historical facts, do you think?
I think if I'm going to think about my own situation, I'm going to think, hold on, we might have been apologised to, but we've never been paid back. We've never been given anything.
So we need to keep a lid on the history of slavery, because if the lid blows off and people start pointing out, for example, that billions of pounds of reparations were paid to plantation owners and slavers, but nothing was paid to the families or the descendants of enslaved human beings.
You know what? Take any situation today, whether we're dying more substantially from the COVID, how we're living poor in housing. You take any situation, and you know what? A little encouragement always sweetens the labour. My dad used to say that. That was his words. And it is so true. You know, no one even seems like they're apologetic for it.
So you haven't moved away from the question I was asking, but it might feel as if you have. So when I say to you, why do you care about this so much? You see the Duchess of Sussex as being a standard bearer.
Oh, yeah, she's going to take the brunt of some of it. She is going to take it for some of it. But you know what? And Harry's seeing what she's taking the brunt of. And you know what? That's the person that he loves. And you know what? He's got a long, long road to go. Oh, gosh, do I feel sorry for them. I really do. But you know what? I'm a first caller, long time listener.
And this is the one. This is the one that tempted you out of tempted you out of Coventry, out of yourself. Well, I hope it's the beginning of a long and beautiful on-air friendship. D 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you want to grab that phone line that D is just vacating for the first time. I wonder how many of us Mike is speaking for when he writes, "Hello, James. I'd love to know just how many women compared to men will be watching this interview. I, for one, couldn't care less." I love that. I did say when I do a raid, and I very rarely do it because it is not very illuminating normally, but exceptions, of course, prove rules. I say, why do you care about this? I don't want people to ring me and say I don't, but I thought Mike's pithiness was worth sharing with you. On a rather more serious note, or certainly caring more than Mike does, this is strong. I think people have a special affection for Harry after his traumatic childhood. I think he's done the right thing. He's protected his wife and family, and he's done what his father failed to do. He's put his wife above the firm. Again, I stress again, like everybody else in the British media, I have no personal knowledge of or insights into what goes on behind those doors, but neither can I state categorically that your perceptions are false. This is strong as well from Den in Newcastle. Den, you, my friend, have a way with words. You really do. The papers wanted a constant dynasty-style soap opera with Meghan as the Alexis Carrington-type character, and she and Harry have spoilt their fun. So now they are targeting her. I look forward, this is where you're really close to poetry, I look forward to the front page saying that an unnamed source has described Meghan as Putin's secret ISIS love child who has shares in Chinese chemical warfare firms, wants nurses' pay cut to the minimum wage to fund compulsory gender reassignment for all police officers and taxi drivers. Dan in Newcastle, if Keith was on the ball, we'd be giving you a round of applause now, but I think he's having his brunch. 10:36 is the time, and to pick up on Mike's point about gender, yes, it is normally the case that it's easier to get men to ring me than women, but occasionally subjects go in the opposite direction, and so far this is one of them. Jade's in Gatwick. Jade, why do you care about this story?
I care because I think I am in conflict with the fact that the royal family are held up, that we look to them for security, for stability. They mean so much to the world, to us. And I think that this challenges that and that vision that we have. But equally, there is so much emphasis on mental health.
Yes.
And Harry has been frontlining that message that this is their truth and this is their feelings. And you can't argue with somebody's feelings about, we don't know the ins and outs. We don't know what's going on inside. We can make our own assumptions.
Keep that under your hat. You could put half a dozen pundits out of business overnight by saying that in public. You realise?
But yeah, we've all got our views.
Yes, we do. And the idea that you can sit in judgment on what someone else is really feeling in contrast to what they tell you they're feeling is quite remarkable. And I hope I'm not overreaching to defend people who've done some pretty despicable things, but I think part of it is forgetting that public figures also are private people,
humans.
Humans.
Well.
That's a great phrase. It's a technical term, Jay. They are indeed humans. And when you're writing about them, I can say from distant experience, you forget that you're writing about humans, and the same can happen when you're talking about them. But the idea that they damage somehow the royal family's reputation by letting the light in, which I think you kind of said, I don't know that that's the fault of the people who let the light in. Isn't it the fault of the people who've done the stuff that's being illuminated, actually?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's the fact that they're threatening.
Yes.
They're drawing light to, and, people are resistant to those views being challenged.
Yes.
And so I think that's why I'm in conflict, because I look to the royal family for that stability.
I kind of do. Perhaps not as much as you do, but and I worry about what happens when the current Queen passes, because then you move into an era. David Baddiel's just tweeted something brilliant. I think you'll like this. He says, what we're seeing is what happens when an institution that has always relied to some extent on silence has to exist in a world that no longer does silence. I don't think you can sustain the attitude you just described with regards to stability and reputation and leadership in a world that no longer does silence.
Yeah. And it's so, and this is why I am possibly being quite. I am a fan of Kate and William.
It shouldn't really be either or. I have a feeling that the more we watch of this interview, the more it may break down like that.
It's going to be either or.
Yes, yeah. I think it might.
But no, I do love them. But I also feel that they're certainly giving us the impression that they are growing up with us, and they are growing up and putting a different spin on how they communicate. And I feel less of the silence from Kate and William.
Yes.
It may well be that they are, I don't know if it's a thought, it must be.
Well, they've got the big jobs, remember, so in a way they have that consolation of status. He will be king one day. I imagine that you can dismiss quite a lot of personal suffering with the knowledge that you're going to be king one day. Prince Harry has the prospect of becoming, even without even without Andrew Windsor's current travails and problems, that's Prince Harry's future if he doesn't act to change it. So he's acted to change it. That's the problem, I guess, with primogeniture, with hereditary privilege, with accidents of birth bestowing so much. And as I think you're wrestling when you talk about being conflicted with the knowledge that that's wrong, but you also like it, because we all grew up in this country and we're all taught to sing the national anthem. And I hate to bring it down to really grim and morbid detail, but what are the chances of getting somebody to go and sacrifice their life in a war between two cousins that they've never met, unless you can introduce some sort of absolutely blinkered loyalty and fealty to people born into epic privilege that you've never met? But I say, I get it. I get it much more than I did as a younger man. Linda is in Leeds. Why do you care, Linda, about this so much? Lindo, I beg your pardon. I've got to get some new glass. Now Lindo's gone, I think. 10:41 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. Warren is in Croydon. Warren, why do you care?
Hi, Jay.
Hello, Warren.
This is an interesting topic because it's not just only about the monarchy, but this is a reflection of the wider society in Britain. Why so many people care so much? Because we see Meghan Markle, and a lot of black women also see her treatment as a reflection of their treatment. And what's so disheartening about this whole saga is that it is so prevalent in the highest part of society, in an elite club of the monarchy. We see another black woman being mistreated. We see many disparities between the treatment of her and other people in the family who should get this treatment, not also should get this treatment. And so you've
lost me a little bit, but that's probably my fault. I mean, I don't see her as being representative of a broader truth within the royal family. I think it's her exceptional nature, background, record that has created the targeting of her. She threatens people.
That's right. I'm in agreement with you. But why is this so important to me is that this is a reflection of many black women's experience in Britain today. Somebody that has so many, we hear of cases of black women saying they're intimidating, they are bullies, and in fact, when we see the interview, we see that it's actually the other way around. That Kate made her cry. And,
yes, but this bit again. Have you watched the interview?
Just clips of it.
How many times have you watched Hamilton, the musical?
Quite a bit.
That's why you say monarchy in the way that you say monarchy.
Yes, probably.
Every single time you said monarchy, I'm thinking Hamilton. I'm almost bursting into song at the time because I knew that you'd watched that a bunch of times, Warren. That's so funny. But I mean, we haven't seen that bit yet. But I think from what I've read, she actually wants it on the record that it was her that cried during this pre-wedding argument or conflict about flower girls, but that the Duchess of Cambridge actually sent her flowers and an apology. So she wanted the record corrected, but she didn't want the Duchess of Cambridge to replace her as the receptacle of public hatred and anger.
That's right.
She was at pains to say, I think she behaved in the way that I would have done had it been the other way round. But I wanted on the record that it wasn't the other way round. Warren, the reason I asked you whether or not you'd seen the interview in full was partly because of a couple of pranksters who went a bit viral over the weekend after inviting four relatively well-known, I don't think any of them have appeared on this programme, but relatively well-known so-called royal experts to comment in detail and knowledgeably about an interview that they conceded off-air. They hadn't even seen themselves, and we'll find out, just in the interests of light and shade, we'll find out a little bit more about that. So I need to withdraw one of the pats that I applied to Nick Ferrari's back at the handover earlier today, because there is even a later edition of the Daily Mail. I nicked the 2 a.m. edition off him, which had Kate Made Me Cry on the front page. The 3 a.m. edition has Meghan interview sensation, how dark will baby's skin be? So we await the comment, of course, of various royal experts who will no doubt be telling us what they make of this interview after they have seen it, which leads me very neatly to my next two guests, Josh Peters and Archie Manners, who are YouTubers and fresh from I can't remember what it was called, the Unify the Nation Award, fresh from bestowing the Unify the Nation Award on someone who will not be named just a couple of years ago. They join me on the line now. I've got to tell you, Josh and Archie, I'm quite nervous. I very, very rarely use my dump button on air, but I'm very conscious of being your next victim, unwittingly, even though we've invited you onto the programme. So if the picture disappears, if the interview ends early, it's because they've done me. So
yeah. You wouldn't dare.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just tell everybody what you've done.
So we basically interviewed royal experts about Harry and Meghan's interview 2 days before anyone had actually seen it. And invited them on a fake TV show and said, would you give your instant post-match analysis to the interview that's going on CBS? Unfortunately, because it's television, we do have to pre-record it, but that won't be a problem, will it? Oh, no, they all said, and offered their views on an interview that, alas, they had not seen.
Did you... I mean, I don't want to ask you, I know, Archie, you also work as a magician, so I'm not going to ask you to breach Magic Circle rules and reveal your secrets, but did you tell them that you'd seen it?
No. We verified that neither we nor them had seen it at all. No. And
obviously you paid them, which is quite a big part of the process.
Yes, we did pay them.
We paid them the kind of fee, well, let's say what we did pay them, the kind of fee they would expect to receive for a television appearance. But we thought it was important to mention to our audience that we did pay them, both because it was the truth, but also because it means that, in a sense, they are monetizing this industry.
I'm intrigued by that. I've lost an argument with my wife, actually, who's also a journalist, because I thought you might have tempted them into this indiscretion by putting more money on the table than is ordinarily available for a kind of gob on a stick gig.
No, we're saving all our money for the pub when we're allowed to go. We're not going to put more money than we need to.
Let's have sorry, go on, Josh.
To pay that amount of money.
No, well, as I say, I got that one wrong. Let's have a little listen to the results, and then we'll come back to Josh and Archie in a moment, and they can tell you how you can find out more about their work.
My name is Victoria Arbiter, A-R, B as in boy, I-T-E-R, and I am royal commentator for CNN.
Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator.
Ingrid Seward, I'm editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine.
You've not seen the interview yet, have you?
No,
great. I think we have a fair idea of where the interview's going. We have a fair idea.
We do, definitely.
What was your overall impression of the interview?
I think that this was an extremely hard-hitting interview.
In the interview, to my mind, this was an actress giving one of her great performances. From start to finish, Meghan was acting.
Do you think, looking back now, that Oprah went rather soft on Harry and Meghan?
I think the interview was really an iron fist in a velvet glove.
She did ask the tough questions. She had to ask the tough questions.
It was not a balanced interview.
But at the same time, I think she did ask those questions in a sympathetic light.
Oprah is a friend and gave them an easy ride.
And certainly favouring Harry and Meghan.
She was totally sympathetic, and there is a great deal in it that the palace will find deeply concerning.
Were you surprised in the interview to hear Meghan's comments about Prince William?
To hear her talking about members of the royal family didn't surprise me at all. I think she was very unwise to do it, but she's the kind of woman that, wants her say.
Meghan used extremely strong language to describe her relations with members of the royal household.
Meghan spoke about her love of animals. Obviously, in the interview, Meghan talked about the Balham Donkey Sanctuary. What does that tell us about Meghan's character?
Meghan talked about her love of animals, love of dogs, love of the Donkey Sanctuary.
In the interview, the nicest thing about Meghan was that she, it's her love of animals.
She does have a love of animals, but that's only one side of her. That's a domestic side.
Is there a Donkey Sanctuary in Balham, Josh?
I don't think there is, no, but that didn't seem to concern our royal correspondent.
So, and obviously, as far as we know, there are no specific comments about Prince William either, but that, of course, just adds to the sense of fun. But there's some seriousness underpinning the fun here, Archie. Why did you do this?
Ultimately, these are the kind of people that wear cashmere on breakfast television sets and once shared a taxi with Princess Margaret and feel that they've got a sort of insight into the royal family. They are then duping both media organisations and the public with their views that arguably, and such as our viewers and your listeners to make their own minds up, but arguably are not informed. And that's shaping what is, I think, now becoming quite a toxic debate. We did not target royal correspondents. We did not target Tim Shipman or Nicholas Witchell, Chris Ship or Nicholas Witchell, or anybody who's a proper journalist. These are people that have set themselves up as experts. They're not journalists. And we also asked very open-ended questions. It was, did Oprah go too soft?
Yes.
And we didn't give them lines. The only 2 lines we gave them were so ludicrous that we almost did it as a chance. There isn't a Balham Donkey Sanctuary. There's no way. Vaccine, when we had the arbiter say, would be selfish for not taking the vaccine.
Yes, we didn't play that bit out. That was very topical, I suppose, but also, a point at which one would imagine some alarm bells would go off, which makes me wonder whether did you target other people who did see through the ruse, or did everybody come through that you went after?
It turns out that royal experts are very keen to pass on their expertise.
for which we should all be grateful. Josh, do you want to tell my listeners a little bit more about the work that you both do? Take the opportunity to speak to this enormous audience, which is no doubt a tiny fraction of your YouTube following.
I don't know about that. So Archie and I have a YouTube channel where we often try and pose experiments, ask questions and explain those questions in a video. We've done a video recently where we nominated Gemma Collins for the Nobel Peace Prize and had our nomination submitted successfully. We've sold Deliveroo meals from my kitchen in my flat. So lots of interesting stuff like that. You can check us out on YouTube. And this was our latest video, and we're happy it's gone well and hope that everyone's enjoyed it.
Josh Peters and Archie Manners, thank you very much indeed for your time. You've also, just glancing at my own inbox, you've worked wonders for my credibility among younger listeners. So that's got to be making it all worthwhile for all three of us. There you go. And of course, the four royal experts mentioned there, Dickie Arbiter, Victoria Arbiter, Richard Fitzwilliams and Ingrid Seward are more than welcome to put their side of the story on this programme as well. The more the merrier, you know how it generally works. I'll also retweet the full film from my own account during the next news bulletin, which is coming up in 2 or 3 minutes. Back to the question of why we care. Now, if you're just joining us, I'm not being lazy. I can prove I'm not being lazy because I took ages to get the question out. It's not like I just came on air and went, give me a ring and tell me why you care. I went round the houses, as you know, as I do every day, before settling upon why I wanted to make this particular inquiry. And this particular inquiry is, why do you care so much? I haven't yet worked out why I do. But, you know, I would quite like to know why you do. Lee is in... No, Richard is in Keighley. Richard, why do you care so much?
I think it's really disheartening that somebody that's talking about suicide so openly is being, not by everybody, of course, but I think that there's been a lot of commentary that there's this narrative around Meghan just being a liar and not actually an individual that's actually gone through some really harsh criticism. And for anybody going through that criticism, I think, you know, you'd have severe doubts about your own mental health. I think it's quite pertinent that she actually said during the interview, I've not obviously listened to the interview because it's not been on here yet. But
you know, I'm not paying for people who are commenting on it who haven't seen it yet. That was the last two lads. I can't see. Yeah, all right. Just as long as they're clear on that.
And you can give me some cash if you want, James. It's not a problem.
My kids need shoes.
Yeah, she said if I didn't say it, I'd do it. And I think, you know, for many people, if you don't talk about mental health issues, you can suffer in silence. And I'm pleased that she's actually said that.
So you start caring today about this, because none of what you've said there would have expressed or explained deep interest in this conflict, this story, this saga, whatever you want to call it, prior to what we've heard about the interview so far. So they all campaigned, all four of them set up, I think, a charity to help young people with mental health. We presume in good faith. But when the time came to actually walk the walk instead of talking the talk, she feels that there was no support and help for her there. And that's why you have come away this morning with a depth of interest.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Fair enough.
Over the past week particularly, when the narrative has built and built and built to a crescendo in terms of actually this thing actually being released. And then, I mean, it's quite interesting. I was listening on while I was waiting to come on to those two guys that did those interviews about people talking about a subject or an interview that they've not heard about at all. And they're just... talking in a way that's their preconceived ideas about this couple.
Yes, and that informs or fuels the fires, doesn't it? And the fact that, you know, people will sit there and say, well, she's clearly lying. And now we turn to an expert. Yes, it's gone 11 o'clock already. I'm going to continue with this. It obviously isn't going to concern us exclusively for the rest of the week, and I do appreciate all of the text coming in pointing out to me other stories that are in the news, because, you know, I was unaware of them. I thought everything else was going hunky-dory. Apparently there's a global pandemic, and Brexit, something called Brexit as well, is causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. Don't be daft. Of course I will return to the major topics of the moment when we're done with this one, but we're not done with it yet. And that question of why we care obviously breaks down, for my purposes at least, into why you care. And it is an odd one. I know that the racism is just such a... I'm white, so I don't know if I'm even sounding stupid when I say how heartbreaking it is. But the denial of it is sometimes... What's the word I want? People genuinely have no idea what's going on. The closest I've ever come to it was probably anti-Semitism and conflating criticism of Israel with criticism of Jewish people, and you, my callers over the years, completely educated me on where I had been in danger of going wrong in the past. And I think the initial pushback is so furious because the accusation is so horrible. So again, I'm conscious, not having ever been a victim of this, that my words may not be entirely valid, but I'm a student of it. I'm a very, very committed student of it, and indeed an advocate of anti-racism or wokeness, as I believe it's called this week. And I can derive some hope sometimes from the fury of the reaction to the accusation, because it means that somewhere inside people are conscious of how awful it is. They're not remotely close yet to acknowledging that they're part of the problem. But it's why, actually, in the last hour, we mentioned Donald Trump's former consigliere, Steve Bannon, didn't we? And his call for people to start wearing the accusation of racism as a badge of honor. And I worried, which I think has happened in America, but you worry what happens here if that actually does occur, you know, when and a caller earlier spoke of, if people had openly admitted their racism, you could almost have more respect for them. That was a woman of colour. I don't agree with her, but again, I'm conscious of not having, I mean, literally as much skin in the game as she does. But it gives me hope, because it means that somewhere inside you recognise how awful racism is, and that explains the pushback, rather than going, yeah, I am. You go, no, I'm flipping not, no, we're not, and you can extrapolate from the personal to the public. So why would anybody have a problem with historic houses publishing more details of where the money came from to build the historic house in the first place? Answer, because it kind of makes it impossible for me to deny, or for me to continue denying, that an awful lot of what I hold dear is built upon atrocities and abominations. You can trust me on this one. I love visiting stately homes, even if they were built with money that was derived from the enslavement of human beings and from plantations. I don't enjoy touring the house or admiring the architecture any less when I know where the money originally came from. And you'll have to go far and wide. They still exist, of course, but you'll have to go far and wide to find a family still in situ in one of these houses. David Harewood, who joins me this week for my Full Disclosure podcast, has a documentary in the pipeline in which he actually does visit the house after which he is named, because the aristocrat who owned the house owned one of David's ancestors. And that is, I've seen a tiny bit of it, but that is something that I can't even begin to get my head around. I can't wait to talk to David. It's going to be another one of those surreal moments where I sit in my spare bedroom on Zoom talking to somebody whose work on screen I have loved for years, and I'm delighted that I'll be able to share it with you later this week. But I know that I'm on potentially quite thin ice here, but I think you have to speak as you find. You certainly have to speak truth to power, and the institutional racism that is just there. I understand why some people have to deny it so furiously. It doesn't make them the problem. It makes them symptoms of the problem. Okay, so and I wouldn't want to break it down name by name. I mean, people who are very, very close to openly admitting their racism will probably be touring the studios today or tomorrow explaining why Meghan Markle is wrong to describe her experience of racism. I mean, you know, a sort of elderly white bloke of a certain demeanour. I'm sure we could all pick a few off the top of our heads who will sit there and say, it's not racism at all. How dare that woman of colour describe her lived experiences? I know a lot more about it than she does. And you know, they don't know that they're doing it. And also, to get ahead in this game, as I know very much from personal experience, you have to be quite obnoxious sometimes. You have to be quite provocative, and you have to be very stubborn in refusing ever to back down. I'm hoping that having made that discovery, having got ahead in this game, you can stay ahead in this game, but it may well be that you can't, in which case I've got the mother of all reckonings on my professional career horizon. But for now, I see other people doing what I would once have done. I don't think, if you brought Trump into it, I don't think if you were a cheerleader for Donald Trump and one of the main bullies of Meghan Markle, I don't think I would have had the the depth of dissonance to sustain that position. I'd have to have completely abandoned one of them by now. I'd have to have said, crikey, how did I miss the fact that Donald Trump was a white supremacist, massive sort of fascist, just about as disgusting as it's possible to imagine in the context of Western democracies. Or I'd have to say, oh, how could I be so vile to Meghan Markle? I wouldn't be able to sustain both indefinitely. But there are plenty of people out there who've got a problem with the Duchess of Sussex and also got a huge problem with Donald Trump. And there'll be plenty of people out there. Well, I don't know if there'll be many people out there, actually, who really like Donald Trump and really like the Duchess of Sussex. That's not necessarily an invitation to phone in. So the racism is going to be a big issue. I wasn't expecting it to be almost the only issue to pop up in the first hour when I asked, why do you care? I thought the final caller on the context on the issue of mental health was very powerful as well. Looking back, I probably should have seen that coming. We're going to stay with the question because it is so interesting. But I just, there's no point doing this if you don't believe that people can change their minds. There's no point doing any of this if you don't believe that people can change their minds. There's no point trying to preach, call for, pray for, hope for a slightly warmer, more friendly world if you don't believe that the people that you consider to currently be responsible for the unfriendliness and the cold of the world can change. You have to believe that they can. It's actually, it's probably the most fundamental tenet of Christianity, which is the only faith I know well enough to speak with my full chest. The whole idea of Christianity is that you can be redeemed, you can be forgiven. I would say that 21st century Britain has somehow contrived to create the polar opposite atmosphere to what you might describe as Christian values. You know, wherever you sit, on whatever spectrum it may be, the idea that you might want to move one day will not be tolerated, which is really dangerous and really sad. And yet, I think pretty hard to argue with. So, I'll play you that little bit again where she talks about the concerns regarding her unborn baby's skin colour. That's what I'll play you next. Then we'll have a look at a couple of the other elements of this interview, and then we'll return to the question of why you care. And then I think we'll move a little later towards... I'll wait and see. It's up to you as well, as ever. But the question of how you would explain to somebody from Mars why we in the United Kingdom in the 21st century have this royal family, have a royal family in this way. So you can look at other countries where, you know, I think in Denmark they've got proper jobs, for example, or they're a tiny fraction of the family are on the public payroll, or, you know, they manage to survive despite only having one palace each. I'm not speaking about Denmark now, I'm speaking about other royal families that haven't gone the way of the French or the Russian royal families. And why we still have one in this way, shape or form. Because I think that's probably the question that they're most frightened of. I think it is, because it's so hard to answer. So it's a 2-hour interview, I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you for sure, they will all have been shattered at the end of it. Oh, I haven't done much name dropping yet today, so I'll also tell you, after this, about the lesson Oprah Winfrey taught me about racism. And you're allowed to snigger at me, and indeed call me all sorts of rude names. Keith is joining in enthusiastically, as ever, to that invitation. But it was actually quite a profound little lesson that I learned when I had the pleasure of meeting her a few years ago. 11:13 is the time. Here's the bombshell bit.
About how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh. And you're not going to tell me who had the conversation?
I think that would be very damaging to them.
I have to say that this interview by Harpo Productions and CBS will be on ITV at 9 p.m. tonight, which I've now heard, I think today, in various different outlets, 463 gazillion times. And having spoken to Josh and Archie, those rather cheeky pranksters, a moment ago, I am now wondering what would happen if I didn't read out that credit for Harpo Productions and CBS regarding the interview, which is on ITV at 9 p.m. tonight. If I play out the next clip and don't mention that, do people actually turn... Poor old Alex, who's producing today. So if I don't mention it, what happens? How long before the studio gets invaded by Oprah Winfrey's copyright stormtroopers. It's coming up to 11:15. Let's crack on with this in a moment. Thank you for indulging my pontifications once again. I do still want to know why you care, and the answers so far have been rather lovely. If you want to be negative, you can, you know. I fear sometimes that my aspirations towards warmth and welcome mean that people who are feeling neither don't come on the programme as much as they used to. If you want to come on and shout rude stuff at me, that's fine, or explain why you as a white bloke know more about racism than a young biracial woman does. That's that. And it sounds like I'm being facetious now, but I'm not. I'm just doing what they did, holding up a mirror. And you know, we're talking about the most inflammatory elements of this interview from what we know from the limited number of clips that have been released. This one now, and I'll be with Lee and then Val imminently, but this one that I'll play you now is just heartbreaking. I mean, it is just absolutely heartbreaking. And again, we talk about it in apocalyptic terms, we talk about it in existential terms in the context of the royal family. But what it really highlights is that their family is no different from yours. You know, I mean, or potentially no different from yours or mine. Thankfully, off the top of my head, I can't think of any feuds, or I certainly can't think of any point in my life where my dad wouldn't have returned my calls. And again, you might not like this, you might even accuse me of apologism. But I can't help feeling desperately sorry for both parties involved in situations like this one.
I feel really let down because he's been through something similar. He knows what pain feels like, and Archie's his grandson.
Prince Harry talking about his father there, Prince Charles. So you have a young man talking about his grandson and also talking about not being able to rely upon the unstinting support of his own father. Who are you going to get cross with? Oh, Greta Thunberg. Oh, sorry, Meghan Markle. It's a no-brainer, isn't it? Lee is in Warminster in Wiltshire. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hi. I care about this because I've got an ever-growing concern about the manipulation of media.
What?
I know. I used to be a paper boy about 30 years ago.
That's probably the only people involved in the newspaper industry that you can trust.
Absolutely, yeah. I managed to promote myself to postman.
Well done.
As a paper boy, I used to think to myself that one day the newspapers will run this country. And here we are with the former journalist as Prime Minister.
Yeah. See, this is fascinating to me, as you probably know, unless you've just tuned in for the first time today, because I'm convinced, and all I ever wanted to be when I was growing up was a newspaper journalist. My father was a newspaper journalist on a newspaper that's just published something that I actually can't believe my eyes on this issue. But I'll return to that in a moment. My dad was on the Telegraph for many years. It's all I ever wanted to do, and I ended up on the Express as show business editor before moving into broadcasting. I'm convinced it's 100 times worse than it was 20 or even 10 years ago.
Yes, definitely. And, I mean, your moral compass is clearly pointing in the right direction. I know you did a little stint with the Daily Express. Managed to redeem yourself.
It was how dare you? If you want my public shame, then I was the video games editor of the Daily Mail under the last editor, Paul Dacre, who is by far the worst offender in the context of the conversation that we're currently having. When I was on the Express, it was a touchy-feely liberal project owned by Lord Hollick, a Labour peer, and edited by Rosie Boycott, who was one of the founders of Spare Rib magazine. So that one doesn't stick, Lee. That one doesn't stick. The Daily Mail video games editor, I shall carry to my grave the mark of shame. Although I did smuggle in a Grand Theft Auto review 2 days before the editorial page described it as the end of civilization as we know it. I smuggled in a 5-star review. But hey-ho, that's all water under the bridge. Talk to me about manipulation.
Okay, so, I mean, what surprises me about this whole situation is the number of people that have hashtag Be Kind Caroline Flack.
Yes, that's true.
And rest in peace to Caroline. And All Lives Matter. The brigade that will, many of those people will say, I'm not racist, but ... You know, it's like I hear you so together so often. People that tend to have 10 ideologies that fit into one box, that when you see where the source comes from for those 10 ideologies, they come from the likes of certain newspapers. Now, how would these reporters, say one editor and one reporter, have so much influence over a country? How would these reporters and journalists like their photograph plastered all over Facebook with a hate campaign towards them and their families when they hide behind a desk typing these things up, almost thinking.
I suppose Twitter does paint. I mean, some of these people do. Social media allows a degree of access. Some of the worst offenders, of course, don't go on social media and they don't even go on any sort of public platforms. But it's not completely without returns. The answer, you probably worked this out for yourself, is just business. This is why I sometimes come across as defending people who I consider to be despicable. I'm not defending, I'm explaining. And a lot of it is business. And it would be a bit like if you were a millionaire butcher, you're not going to want anyone else telling you what to put in your sausages, because the size of your fortune is the proof of your sausages, if you see what I mean.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, my mum always said 2 wrongs don't make a right anyway, so I wouldn't go out on a particular witch hunt.
I don't think she made that up.
Didn't she?
No, I don't think she. Right, I don't think that was one of your mum's pearls.
I'm going to be on the old hooter.
Yeah, seriously, mate. She's the pearls.
I don't want to go on a witch hunt for these reporters and journalists, but at the same time, I mean, I just find it so frustrating that my own family members, who I love dearly and who are kind and compassionate, have turned against Meghan, have turned against people of colour, have without knowing it. They don't realise why it's happening,
and they don't. When you point it out, they don't realise it still, and they end up angry with you, I suspect.
I'm crazy. I mean, my grandmother, who's 89, has bought the Daily Express since the end of the Second World War. Did we not convert her during that brief period of liberal idealism that I was part of? We didn't. Apparently, yeah. And then she switched to the Daily Mail to catch up on the gaming side of things. But
the good cross was that, and it is there, and it's business, and it really. And the reason I won't go on a witch hunt after the reporters in particular is because, Lee, and I hope this doesn't turn you against me, I think I probably would have been one of them if I hadn't had this astonishing slice of luck in my career, if I hadn't actually ended up doing this for a living, loving every minute of it, and having an employer who really does allow me to speak my truth, which is so rare in the British media. In fact, think of someone else with a platform as big as this, who is allowed to condemn racism, criticise these kind of practices, talk honestly about how despicable institution and how widespread it is. You want to get rich, you want to get ahead in this business, you've got to be attacking statues, man. You've got to be really laying down the law on my stop and search is brilliant for young black kids, but don't you dare come after me when you're trying to impose coronavirus restrictions. You've got to love the police but hate being policed, and you just count the platforms. But I say it again, it feels like you're telling a millionaire butcher that you know better about what should be in his sausages than he does. And what they sell is not sausages, obviously. Although the biggest spike in circulation the Daily Express ever had when I was on it was when they gave away packets of seeds free with the newspaper. The sales went through the roof. Imagine what packets of sausages could have done in the days when vegetarianism wasn't so popular. So what they sell is fear. I do not get this. The 2 things that confuse me most. I read a brilliant article about it this weekend. You know that I'm eternally baffled by deference and forelock tugging. The idea that anybody in this country with an IQ in double figures could think that Jacob Rees-Mogg is cleverer than them is just absolutely hilarious to me, and also heartbreaking at the same time, because you are limiting your own horizons. You're putting shackles on your own children, their ambition and their aspiration. The idea that you should know your place is the single most toxic lesson that you can teach a child. And I'll tell you this, that they don't teach their children to know their place. And the second thing is this desire to feel persecuted, this absolute hunger for victimhood. Look, there's some people over there and they're attacking you. What are they doing? Oh, they're running the European Union like the Fourth Reich, and they really wish you harm. Okay? Any proof? No. Don't ask for facts. Just feel persecuted. And now it's statues. They're coming to take down your statues. They're going to attack your culture and your stately homes. How are they going to do that? By telling you about things that actually happened. Well, we can't have any. I'll clutch my purse. And they sell it. They sell you your own victimhood. And I don't know. I wish I could turn my conscience off and do it, because my kids need shoes. But especially now they're going back to school. Hallelujah. Long may that continue. Safely. But it works. I don't understand why people hand over their hard-earned cash and indeed their consciences so happily and so freely to people who are selling nothing but false victimhood and false persecution. Best summed up probably in that despicable poster that Nigel Farage unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist shouting Britain first. That man was terrified of things that don't exist. Things that were, in fact, depicted, non-existent things depicted on that poster. All these people that wish you harm. Where are they? Oh, I found one. And that means we must hate 6 million people. Okay. Why so hungry? Why so desperate? And listen, generalisations are always a little bit loose. Of course they are. I remember a fella not long ago was furious with me for suggesting that everybody who had a problem with Marcus Rashford had voted for Brexit, which clearly isn't true. There'll be plenty of people out there. I'm bored of Brexit in some context. I'm bored of having to say, some of my best friends voted for it, some of my family members voted for it, and they aren't racists. But I haven't met a racist who didn't. Maybe I should get out more. But you just look at the generalisations here, and you can be fairly confident that people who think that their culture is somehow under attack, or people who think you're not allowed to say you're English in this country anymore without getting arrested, people who are trying to build political careers on campaigning to be allowed to say things that they're currently not allowed to say, despite not having yet addressed the question of how they're going to tell you about the things they're not allowed to say if they're currently not allowed to say the things that they're campaigning to suddenly be allowed to say. I'm fairly confident that almost all of them will fit very neatly into one side of the Meghan Markle conversation. They'll have a huge problem with her and they won't really be able to tell you why. But if you suggest you know why, they'll be almost as angry with you for pointing out their racism as they are with her for being biracial. Why do you care about this story? I should probably have a crack at trying to explain why I do. I have a lazy knee-jerk reaction to what I perceive to be bullying, and indeed to racism. And actually, I said somewhat glibly earlier, I've never been a victim of racism myself. A couple of you have reminded me. I was last week when that list circulated of the names that have been banned from the Pontins holiday camp. And I laughed about that, and then read a couple of things that made me think maybe I shouldn't have laughed about it, because that is the lived regular experience of traveller families who've got the same name as me. So it maybe wasn't something we should have made quite so light of, but, you know, you're pointing out that is a tiny, 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 tiny taste of what it might be like. And you're right, I should have mentioned that. Thanks in particular to Aisling for pointing that out to me. And then I said I'd share my Oprah Winfrey story on this issue as well, mostly just to name drop. No, don't be silly, because it's really important. So Oprah told me, and we've got the clip somewhere, it was while I was working here, about the first time she was called the N-word, and she used it, which sent a shiver down my spine, I've got to be honest with you. And I, at the time, would have been of the view that it wouldn't hurt her now. She is one of the most successful people on the planet, of any colour or gender. And I was so wrong about that. Because, of course, in many ways, I'm not suggesting for a minute it's worse, but not long after we spoke, it may have been before, don't at me, she felt that she'd been turned away from a shop because she wasn't recognised. She was seen only as being black. And of course, what that proves is it doesn't matter what you do. That's the thing about racism. It doesn't matter what you do, how high you rise, how successful you may be. Might be part of the reason why there are so few football managers of colour, despite the fact that so many brilliant players are black. But the N-word when she was a little girl, I don't know how, as a silly old sausage, I would have thought, well, it wouldn't hurt as much now. It will hurt more now, because it means there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to protect yourself from that prejudice. It doesn't matter how successful you become. It doesn't matter how many lives you change, how many medals you win. Serena Williams has been very strong talking about the Duchess of Sussex already. And remember, in America, they've seen the interview. I don't know why I took that message away from my interview with Oprah Winfrey. I say interview, it was one of those sort of 10-minute jobs with 30 other journalists queuing up behind me. But I'll tell you something else about it. You know, you hear that phrase when they talk to you, you're the only person in the room. You talk to Oprah Winfrey, you're the only person on the planet for the duration of that conversation. That's a gift. It's such a gift. But that story, that message, that combination, that memory really came to the fore for me as I was preparing to come on air today. Because, of course, Oprah Winfrey is at the heart of this interview with Meghan Markle as was. And that's the point, is even she. It doesn't matter what you do, you see. That's the thing about racism. You've got a problem with me, I can fix it, either by changing your mind or by pretending that I'm not the thing you've got a problem with. You know, if you hate me because I'm anti-racist, I pretend to be racist for 10 minutes, you'd be my biggest fan, right? Call me now, tell me about Stop and Search. I know how I could do that. That's the privilege of my whiteness. Because if I was black, even if I became a senior cabinet politician and introduced policies that were deliberately designed to discriminate against people with, for example, foreign parents, you still wouldn't. You'd think, oh, I like that. Yeah, that's good. I love that policy. That one's all right. But you still wouldn't change. You wouldn't stop it. However far these people bend to diffuse the racist bullying, however much they put on the clothes of the actual racist bullies, they'll never, I don't believe, be accepted by racist bullies. And weirdly, it's the rest of us, the woke, that don't think there should be any question of acceptance at all, because I think you're worth exactly the same as me. I think we're equals, and our parents were equals, and I don't care where they were born. You've got as much right to be British as anybody else does, even if your parents were refugees from Idi Amin's Uganda or people that came here from Pakistan to work in the 60s. Funny old world. 11:39, Val's in Islington. Sorry, Val, I didn't know I had that one brewing. What made you pick up the phone?
James,
Val.
I care because as a black woman, a mother,
yes,
a grandmother, I care because the box needs to be open. Just what you were saying just now about racism. It is so in the system. It is, in this country, you have two things. You have the race and you have the class. And the people of this country are so used to being, looking up
yes,
at aristocracy and seeing themselves less than. And so what happens is the box of the one that you look up has been opened. There's a saying that I love by Rousseau. Man is born free, but everywhere in chains.
It's the first line of the social contract, isn't it? It's like
Listen.
Yes, I am. I'm just showing off. You know me. I can't help it. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
I just know it's not. When I say listen, that's the way I say it.
I think I need it occasionally.
I wasn't telling you to. Anyway.
Yes.
I just finished a politics and international degree at uni. And so that's where I picked that up. And that was one of the most proficient quotes I held on to. Because look at today's International Women's Day.
Yes, it is. And what are we doing?
Young black woman. Young woman. Because it's such a sad thing that we have to see and describe people by the colour of their skin or whatever. Not just see them as human beings. But that's something that's happened. And she is saying these are the things that she went through. And she's been questioned.
That's the bit that, I mean, it's not surprising, but it's shocking, isn't it? Even when she talks about having suicidal thoughts, the people who've hurt her so much call her a liar.
Why would people do this?
Well, I don't know. Why do you think?
I think they're sad. I think anybody who can do this to another human being, it means their life is sad and it's a reflection of how they may have been treated. And so rather than feel empathy, they're saying you must feel it too. And, I've been to Kensington Palace. I worked for a charity and we went there for a fundraising event. And as I walked through to this event and walked through the palace, because this was just after, it would have been before Diane.
Yes.
No, it would have been after. I can't remember. It was 1990 something.
You're not
anyway.
on trial. Go on.
And I went in, and it was as if it was a whole different world. the people that we met, the aristocracies that were there. I mean, one lady even invited me for a cup of tea. The next day, she goes, I've never met anybody like you before.
What
planet?
That's kind of what I'm trying to talk about, but you can do it so much better than I can, because that woman's not a bad woman, right?
No!
But she's utterly unaware of the system of which she's a part, and when you tell her what she's a part of, she's going to bridle, she's going to get upset with you.
And that's why the firm or the royal family must be open now. We've opened up the door to...
They've let the light in.
Gay and lesbian. We've opened up the door, but race is still there. The door.
I know it is, and I don't know how you help people who are capable of being a little bit more woke, if you like, or indeed alive to prejudices and racism. I don't know how you help the ones that can be helped. I really don't. But I carry on trying. I mean, the problem is sometimes it's better box office to just wind up the ones who don't want to be helped. And, you know, for every viral clip, you can't help wondering how many listeners might perhaps have been helped towards the light if you'd used a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. But enough about me. Val, you take care. I look forward to your next call. It's coming up to 11:45. You're listening to Jack. God, it's flown by today. How many clips have we played? We've only played 2. Should we play one more just before we head towards the break? Do you know, I don't think I said after the last clip of Harry talking about his dad, I don't think I said, the interview by Harpo Productions and CBS will be on ITV at 9 p.m. tonight, of course. So here's a little bit about mental health, and I have to warn you in advance as a trigger warning that the Duchess of Sussex also speaks here about suicidal ideation.
I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it. And I just didn't want to be alive anymore.
11:45. Here is an old white bloke to tell you why she's lying. I forgot to do it again. The interview by Harpo Productions and the CBS. And CBS will be on ITV at 9 p.m. tonight, of course. Quite a lot of you are making mischief, shall we say, with the scheduling of the breaks on the programme. For the record, I can categorically state that none of my colleagues would accuse Meghan Markle of lying, and we are almost all old white blokes. So my little aside just before the last break was incredibly general about the British media, not in any way specific. Dennis is in Uxbridge. Dennis, why do you care?
Well, care is a funny word, isn't it? But I always thought she was a businesswoman, and she saw an opportunity, and she got the opportunity, but it didn't work here, so she went to America. And now they're worth millions and millions and millions and millions.
Right.
And I think it just comes down to money with her.
Okay. What do you base that on, do you think? Well, I mean, do you have any special information, inside information?
Well, no, it's just...
No. Where'd you get that from, then?
Looking at the history...
Yeah.
God, you know, I feel really sorry for him.
Do you?
See him walking behind his mother's coffin, blah.
Yeah.
You know? And
you can't say blah after saying that.
Well, he's like Princess Margaret.
Right.
He was never going to be anything more.
I'm just interested in where you got the conviction that the Duchess of Sussex is a sort of mercenary fortune hunter. What's that based on? What were the clues?
Well, on some of the things that I've heard on the radio, where she's up at 4 o'clock in the morning sending emails and...
How does that make her greedy?
Well, I think for the very fact she went to one of the richest, the most powerful women in television in America, Oprah Winfrey.
Where would you go if you wanted to reach the biggest audience possible?
I probably would go to the same place.
Are you a greedy fortune hunter who's only in it for the money?
No, I'm very...
So how do you use that as evidence that she is then, mate?
I'm very lucky. I have no money and I'm very happy.
So where do you get the clues about her, for example, not being in love, but in being in pursuit of money?
Yeah, she wasn't a famous actress. She was a television...
And what was Kate Middleton?
TV star. Kate Middleton?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kate, look, I think she had her problems with...
No, I want you to remind me what she was doing before she married into the royal family.
I think she was from a fairly wealthy...
No, career-wise, Dennis, obviously.
Career-wise,
yeah.
She was in university having a great time.
No, she didn't marry him when she was still a student. What job did she do after university?
Oh, I don't know.
Right, but Meghan Markle wasn't a proper Hollywood star, and that means she must have been. That means she must have been a fortune hunter.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I know you would. You just did. Yeah.
Of improving the brand, and who wouldn't use that?
Right, and that's what.
And can I just mention one more thing?
Probably not. No, that's what the Duchess of Cambridge did as well. Is it just try to get rich, and who wouldn't do that?
No, I think she used the royal family in her plan, and the plan didn't work. So she went.
No, we're talking about the Duchess of Cambridge now. I just want to know what she gave up.
I get confused.
You're telling me, Dennis. So just finally, where do you get your clues from? Because sending emails early in the morning, I get emails early in the morning. It doesn't mean that the person who sent them is some sort of dishonest fortune hunter. Who would you say were your major sources?
Well, it's probably from the radio, listening to it in the morning time.
Right.
There you go.
Have a great day. Sarah's in Notting Hill. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello. I did watch some of it. I couldn't stagger to the end, but I was terribly frustrated by it because to me it just felt as though if you'd been planning it out in advance and you'd written down a list of kind of trigger topics that needed to be ticked off in order to raise as much kind of angst as possible and upset as many people as possible, you would go racism, mental health, suicide, lack of family support, issues about titles.
You don't think that's a list of the things that they feel most deeply about?
No, I think it felt to me as though they'd tried to cover absolutely every possible one.
Why wouldn't they?
A little story for each.
Why wouldn't they do that?
Well,
or why shouldn't they?
Because there were some missing that were the ones that were not so favourable for them to be able to cover, such as the issues about her family, her background, issues about Harry's past, things that might have made them uncomfortable. There was nothing in there. There was not a single moment where they accepted any fault whatsoever, but they were very ready to hurl unprovable smears at other people.
Okay, so you think they were lying then?
I don't think it's about lying so much. I have no idea whether they were lying
what's
or
an
not,
unprovable smear? What's an unprovable smear if it's also the truth?
An unprovable smear would be these comments about whether anyone actually had said the point about the skin colour.
So you're suggesting that I think he said that as well, so you're suggesting that they both lied?
Well, they differed between what the two of them said, but no one can actually...
Why won't you just come out and say that you think that they're lying? Unprovable smear means you already have.
No, it's a completely different thing. It's a point about...
Well, I need your help in understanding.
Attacking someone or attacking a family when they cannot defend themselves because there are no specific charges.
So you feel sorry that the royal family are in such a weak position?
I don't feel particularly sorry for them either. I just think that it's...
Why can't they defend themselves?
Unbalanced. Why can't they defend themselves? Because that's the whole structure. That's what this interview is relying on.
No, I'm asking you why they can't defend themselves.
They're not going to have a parallel.
Why can't they defend themselves?
What would they say? What would you do? They say, no, we didn't say that.
Yes.
I mean...
well, that's what I'd do if someone said that about me.
But that then descends just down to playground bullying, doesn't it?
No, I think the playground bullying is what they were talking about. But anyway, just finally, what's the difference between an unprovable smear and a lie?
A lie would be something that's a specific point that you can turn around and say that absolutely didn't happen.
Right, and you can't say that about what they've said.
No,
and that's why you're so cross.
Actually, no, it's not why I'm so cross.
Well, then tell me again why you are.
I'm cross because they tried to, I think, create this as similar to the Diana interview.
You've said that already, but let's focus on this interview. Why are you cross? Because a woman has talked about having suicidal thoughts, having a man's talked. No, hang on. A man has talked about his own father not returning his calls. All I come away with is sadness and sympathy, in large part for everybody concerned. I can feel sorry for Prince Charles and for Prince William and for the Duchess of Cambridge. You come away cross, and I just want to know why. With them, you come away cross with them, which is fascinating to me.
they took the higher ground on every single point, and I just think that's...
So you'd like them to have criticised themselves more?
Yes, I think they could have acknowledged some weaknesses. I do think it's physically possible that no one has got any fault.
No, I don't know quite how you watched that and thought that they were claiming not to have any faults. I mean, but, you know, you've watched more of it than I have, clearly, and you're cross with them because they tried to portray themselves in the best possible light.
As being perfect.
They tried to portray themselves in the best possible light. So they gave an interview about years of being abused with no chance to put their own side of the story, and you're cross with them for trying to portray themselves positively.
They've been planning the interview for 3 years.
Yeah. So it's not a trick question. That's what you're cross about, is that they tried too hard to portray themselves in a positive light.
No, I'm cross about the fact that it could have been a more real interview.
So now you're giving Oprah Winfrey tips on how to conduct interviews.
But she's been planning it for 3 years.
Because you've said that 3 times.
Yes. Well, because it's a massive point.
What would you have done? I mean, if Oprah was here now, what tips would, if she was here now, what tips would you give her?
What, to make it more compelling?
No, to be a more successful media figure, Oprah Winfrey, to be a better interviewer.
Oh, well, that would be difficult, wouldn't it? Because, I mean, you can see why...
Not for you, Sarah. Not for you. You could do it in your sleep, I'm sure.
Well, there's a difference, isn't there? Has Oprah managed to actually...
You're not playing the game, Sarah. She's here now. You're giving her tips on how to be a better interviewer. What would you say to her?
I'd say, Oprah, why don't you for once just push back on something that someone says, and you might get a surprise answer instead of pre-scripting every single word.
And you felt that interview was, every single word was pre-scripted?
Yeah.
And your proof for that is?
Is because of the smooth way. Yeah. There's no possible...
Okay. Well, if I'm lucky enough ever to interview her again, I shall certainly pass on your advice. It's coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and I know it's a valid criticism. They certainly hoped to come out of that interview with Oprah Winfrey well, and Sarah seems cross that they may have come out too well. I don't know who you're going to blame for that. Are you going to blame Meghan Markle? Are you going to blame Oprah Winfrey? Or are you going to blame Prince Harry? Or maybe all of the above. But perhaps we could rank them in order. As to why it appears to have gone so well and left so many people so cross. I haven't even seen it yet. It might be a complete disaster. I'm going to continue with this. It's really interesting, isn't it? Why do we care? Why do you care? Why do I care? Oh, a whole heap of reasons, but many I hadn't properly understood before I read that piece by the Royal Suitor, R.S. Locke, as she blogs as on Medium, explaining about the pyramid, if you like, of our society. I know, if you'd asked me before I read it whether or not I was an astute student of hierarchical injustice, I'd have said, yes, I am. Give me the money now. But I'm not. That interplay between class and race, just think about it in a sentence, right? If you are persuaded that your culture is under attack by right-wing politicians who are picking your pocket at the time, sacrificing your livelihoods, your futures, your protections, your freedoms, your workplace rights upon the altar of rank profiteering, why would you trust them when they tell you that your culture is under attack and there's no evidence of it? And most of this is again back to the Govian experts, isn't it? You can find one or two people on every university campus who are convinced that their freedoms are under imminent threat. Massive majority don't feel that way. I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking out loud about why culture war has become such a big phrase and why we don't hear political correctness anymore. All we ever hear is woke, because we know now what political correctness meant. Political correctness gone mad. It's anti-racism gone mad. What does woke mean in this? Once you remove the transgender debate, which is unique in its difficulties, remove that and tell me what woke means. What is it you're not allowed to say? You can't say you're Stuart Lee. Of course, I should always credit him for this. You can't say you're English anymore in this country without being arrested. Go on, then. First, sort of, what would you call it? penny drop call. One of the moments where I thought, if I'm going to carry on doing this job for a while, I wonder if I can do it a little bit differently from how it's been done before. Which is an incredibly arrogant thought, given that people like Clive Bull and Nick Abbott have completely written the rule books, torn them up and written them again over all the years, long before I ever got on air. But I did take a call from a fellow in Hounslow who said, you can't say what you want in this country about immigration without being called a racist. So I said to him, go on, say it, I'll protect you, I'll look after you, I'll make sure no one calls you a racist. You can read this scintillating exchange in my first book, How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong. And he lived in Hounslow, which is near Heathrow Airport, and historically has a lot of people living there who came into this country from overseas to work at the airport and the attendant industries. And he said, all right, I live in Hounslow, it's full of Pakistanis and they all smell. Okay, I'm not necessarily going to call you a racist at this point, although you might want to visit an ear, nose and throat surgeon at some point in the very near future. So I said, what do they smell of, John? He said, curry, James. I thought, okay. And do you like curry, John? Yes, James. And that's the thing he wasn't allowed to say for fear of being called a racist. He'll probably be starting his own political party soon. John is in Reading. John, why do you care?
That's a very weird intro, but okay.
Different John, I should stress. Carry on.
Different. So, James, as a millennial who also loves avocado quite ridiculously, I see a connection basically to this story, and there's one word that I'm going to use at the start of the story and end the story. It's relevance.
Yeah, go on.
The story I have is basically around the year after the Twin Towers attack. I was taking my Duke of Edinburgh award, and it was the first time I ever experienced real racism. I was doing my Duke of Edinburgh award with a whole bunch of Indian Pakistani lads.
Yeah.
And there was one bloke who was running it in his late 30s, and he was a Sikh lad. And we were walking from Slough at the time, all the way through the Windsor Great Park, and basically was going to go to a camp there. We walked through the town centre. We got past the castle, and I was standing in the middle of this crowd of lads. And no
where are we going with this? Have you run it by the producer?
No. It's okay. I can change it, but it's from my understanding of basically how it was eye-opening for me.
But you're not going to accuse anybody of anything.
No, I'm not.
No, fine. Carry on then, because the fact that you were in Windsor Great Park just made me worry a little bit that you might malign somebody or accuse someone who's not here to defend themselves.
No, not in the slightest, mate. And it was basically I was walking through, and then we got surrounded by police officers. And when we got surrounded, police officers, I popped out, and all the police officers just turned away and walked off. And then later that evening, when I was standing around the campfire, I asked the guy, I said, what was that about? Because I have no understanding as a 16-year-old. And none of them wanted to say, except for the bloke who said, just don't worry about it.
Because for them, it was already normal.
Yeah.
Why does that make you care about the interview? I mean, I think I can join the dots, but I want you to put it in your own words if you can.
Why did I care about the interview? Because as a young person, trying to understand the relevance of the royal family, as a young person who spent his entire life around Pakistani, Indian, black lads, anyone from another race, I, at the moment, can't see a relevance to the royal family, except for a royal family which allowed this young woman to be tarnished. Or attacked because of her race, and they did nothing to help.
And this is the. I mean, it's. I don't know.
I could use one example.
Go on.
And now, while I was on the hold to you, I thought, why don't I use Google?
Yeah.
As a smart man, and I noticed last year the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge used basically their private channels to basically tell the newspapers to stop a story being run, and they stopped a story being run about their children.
Right.
Why couldn't the royal family do exactly the same thing?
Well, I know the answer to that, and it's the difference between news and comment. You're not going to be able to control comment pieces or speculation pieces. I'm not familiar with the example that you used, John, either, but broadening out this one interview into much bigger issues is clearly what is happening, what is going to happen, and what is going to annoy some of the people who would much rather they'd come across worse. I don't think I'm misrepresenting Sarah in Notting Hill from just before the 12 noon news. If I am, I can only apologise. But the idea that they should have talked more about things that might have made them look bad is a very interesting approach to what is a public relations exercise. I mean, let's not be under any illusions about that. They are here in order to put forward their version of events, having endured years of seeing the opposite version of events trumpeted from the front pages and 11 pages inside of every single newspaper in the country, one of which I think now has to publish a front page apology to the Duchess of Sussex. So I can't imagine they're going to be rolling over anytime soon. Should they have done it? There's a question for the ages. Only they can answer that. Actually, I know that puts me and many other deserving individuals out of business, but I think only they can answer that. Should they have done it? I mean, will it have moved anyone? People who already didn't like them, whether or not there is any racist subtext to that position, whether people are aware of that racist subtext or not, whether it exists in that particular case with that particular critic or not. Are any of them going to have moved? Any needles nudged? Maybe. See, the thing is, it's the story of my life at the moment. I don't really have very strong views one way or the other. But when you see the massive majority of the most powerful institutions in the land all swimming in one direction, there is a temptation to at least swim a little bit in the other direction. I'm not doing that here. I have no reason not to like them. I take them as I find them. They seem to be solid. They seem to be sincere. They seem to be sound. Harry, in particular, on his work with wounded veterans and in the context of mental health, speaking about his own travails, I know more about him than I do about her. I genuinely don't know what it is I'm supposed to not like about him. And into that vacuum, into that space, move possible answers. So the reason why you've taken against Prince Harry is because of the woman that he married. So why don't you like the woman that he's married? Oh, well, and then you speak to people like Dennis who think she's a gold digger. That was the phrase I was looking for. I kept saying fortune hunter. But you don't level that accusation at any other people who've married into the royal family from positions of much less individual and personal success. So I can't help thinking that the real problem you've got with her is that she's not a gold digger. The real problem that you've got with her is that she was an established independent individual before she married into the royal family. And of course, if you are living on your knees, thinking that the royal family somehow deserves this prominence, this prestige, this privilege, this inherited wealth, this inherited seniority, these relatively ludicrous titles, the last thing you ever want is someone who comes along and sort of accidentally, really, just turns a spotlight on how silly it all is. What you want is someone who walks a couple of paces behind her husband, does exactly what she's told and had no career to speak of before she married into the royal family. That way you can cling on to the idea that there's anything normal about the whole institution. I don't know. Hannah's in Eltham. Hannah, what would you like to say?
Good morning,
Hello,
James.
Hannah.
Thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome.
So I'm not very bothered about the royals. Like, it's just...
This is really just a phone-in for people who do care. Sorry, but it is.
They've never been a big interest for me.
Okay.
Until Meghan came along, because I have a son who is dual heritage. His dad is Black African. I'm white.
Yes.
And so seeing that representation is amazing. It's great for me and it's great for my son. But I'm just so sad. I feel really, really sad about the state of affairs in this country at the moment. I think the abuse that they've had from people is just nonsensical. I don't understand where it comes from, apart from her race.
Well, let's try, and I hope we don't offend anyone by doing this. Let's try and think whether there might be something else. I mean, misogynoir is a word I've been introduced to by my listeners, and there is also a problem with strong women, full stop. It just gets worse when it's a woman of colour. So there's misogyny going on. It's not all racism. That's not much of a defence, is it?
You're right, though. I think we're living currently in a society that is very misogynistic and very racist. And I'm sorry to say that. And I know there will be a lot of people out there denying it and saying we're not racist.
Or we're the least racist country in the world, or this, all that kind of thing.
Rubbish.
Well, it might not be, but it doesn't mean we're not racist.
We are racist. We really, really are. You know, I grew up in very sort of white places in the UK. I now live in southeast London. I don't feel like I could go anywhere else because I don't want my son to feel like he's the only brown face in a room. But I have heard it all. I've heard it at school. We had a Pakistani girl in our class, and when I joined the school, my classmates told me that, you know, she smells and nobody talks to her. And I was really shocked because my family, you know, we weren't brought up that way. But I feel like now, you know, 30, 40 years later, the racism is there. It's almost less subtle than it was. It's like people are happy to come out and say stuff that's racist. If you call them out on it, they say, you know, how dare you?
We've turned some of the most predictable and plodding racists in the country into public figures. We've given them radio shows and newspaper columns and put them all over the place. Of course it's more acceptable now than it was. Where would you date it from, out of interest?
Brexit.
No, I'd go back further than that. And you know me, I'll happily blame Brexit for almost anything, including the price of fish, literally. But no, it goes back. The Brexit campaign lifted the lid off things. I mean, that poster that Farage unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated, being a case in point. But I think it was more the complaining about political correct. What is it that you're not allowed to say? If you tell people they're not allowed to say anything, they don't have to be twisted to resent that. But of course, if they can't provide any evidence of what it is they're not allowed to say, then you have to wonder what's in it for the people telling them that they're not allowed to say stuff.
Well, exactly. It's just bonkers. You're not allowed to be homophobic, and you're not allowed to be racist.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be sexist, and people have a problem with that.
Well, why can't I be racist? Why can't I be homophobic? Why can't I be sexist? That seems to be the complaint. That seems to be what being anti-woke means, as far as I can tell, once you remove the transgender debate from the equation, which is uniquely complicated. To me, at least, at this stage in my life, hopefully I'll see things more clearly as I age. But generally, what does anti-woke mean? It just means, you know, why can't we be publicly vile? I don't know. Maybe that's what freedom means in many people's minds. The freedom to just be absolutely horrible to others for no reason whatsoever, and often with no cause at all. Seems to me a fairly worthy project to try and steer a society away from that kind of thing. But hey-ho, once again, I'm swimming against the tide, at least. Hannah is swimming with me. Your appetite for talking about this, no doubt due to the cunning complexity of the questions that I've been asking you, rather than just a kind of unquenchable thirst for matters royal, suggests that we could carry on for hours. I'm fairly confident that my colleagues on LBC later in the day will continue some of these, or continue the conversation about this interview. And of course, the longer the day goes on, the more people might actually have seen it. I'll probably watch it tonight. It's 2 hours though. I struggle to stay awake these days. It's it's a late night for me. And the question of whether or not they will regret it seems interesting to me when we've got a little bit more detail in front of us. I can't imagine it's turned anyone against them. Just think about this for a minute, will you? Talking about being essentially abandoned by your dad during a really difficult time, regardless of the rights and wrongs, all right? Being abandoned by your dad stops returning your calls. Talking about suicidal ideation, talking about wanting to seek help and being told that you can't. Talking about mental health issues, which you have set up a charity with your brother and sister-in-law, ostensibly to promote and to express the importance of talking about it. Harry delivers a line where he admits to a sense of shame when he was contemplating conversations about his wife's mental health. That's so helpful. That's so powerful to so many people. And they come across sometimes as a bit naive, a bit idealistic, and the idea, we've got enormous privilege and we're going to try and use it to help people. Quite how that ends up boiling so much proverbial is just beyond me, even if they got it horribly wrong. Maybe you think their intentions are bad. Maybe you think they're lying when they talk about, maybe you think that it's a lookalike that founded the Invictus Games for service personnel injured in the line of duty. Maybe you think that it was a different Meghan Markle who became a United Nations ambassador, I think before she met Prince Harry. Maybe it wasn't that same lad who was made to walk behind the coffin of his dead mother, a death he believes was attributable in part to the hounding of the media and the paparazzi. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't. I just see this out of all the subjects. In some ways, it's the least important of all the ingredients that are currently being prepared to entice you into a so-called culture war. Because it is just a domestic dispute between a family. But in other ways, it can be the most emblematic. What is it? I've asked you, how many times have I asked you, what is it they're supposed to have done wrong? And the answer, increasingly, it seems to me, is that they opened the curtains. And we're blaming them for what's inside. We're blaming them for what's behind the curtains. They've opened the curtains. Not just on the royal family, but on how... And this is where the culture war conundrum kicks in such a dangerous and scary way, because, you know, they've kind of opened up the curtains to what our country, our wonderful country, could do better. And one of the many things it could do better is acknowledge the histories of many of the people that live here, for good and for ill. More facts, more history, more knowledge. And that appears to upset people who get upset by Meghan Markle's presence in the royal family, or perhaps more pertinently, her insistence on retaining her autonomy and her independence, her truth. Precisely the same people that get upset with the Duchess of Sussex wanting to be in control of her own life are the people who get upset with suggestions that we should have a little bit more knowledge about our own country. Riddle me that. Seriously, because I you know what keeps me going every day, apart from the money and Keith's doe-like gaze into the studio from the other side of the glass. What keeps me going every day is the thought that things will get better. Maybe that's what upsets people so much, is that they seem to have become emblematic of the belief that things could probably be better. And if you deep down know why they're not better, or why you're not better, you're going to hate the bones of them, aren't you? Because they're holding up mirrors to the royal family in general, to the media in particular, and certain members of the media completely, but also to society at large. See, for me, to listen to callers of colour tell me that we live in an institutionally racist country, I don't take that as a personal insult. I take that as a perspective built upon their lived experience, which is very different from mine. And then they share those experiences with me, whether it's in the context of stop and search, whether it's in the context of job applications, whether it's in the context of Oprah Winfrey. I slightly misremembered walking into a shop in Switzerland and being told that she might like to look at a different handbag than the one she was looking at because the one she was looking at was so expensive. That's never going to happen to me. Well, not unless I wear my egg-stained sweatsuit or something like that. But, you know, it is just true. It's not an insult to you or to me, for people of very different heritages to describe what happens to them, or indeed what happened to their ancestors. Do you know who I think of all the time at the moment? And I wish she'd told us. I wish I'd held her feet to the flames a bit more. The lady who worked, the woman who rang me a couple of years ago, maybe a bit more recently than that, but pre-COVID, remember that? Who was a tour guide in a stately home. It must have been when the National Trust was first people were first trying to slice and dice the National Trust as something else you should get cross with, because, you know, we've left the European Union now, and you need new enemies, so we're going to pick the National Trust. I mean, these people are hilarious. And she rang in, and she was showing some school children around this big stately home. I wonder whether I have worked out which one it is subsequently, but I'll never know, of course. And one of the youngsters said to her, "Where did the money come from to build this place, miss?" Which is it's not just a valid question, it's the most important question of all, really, if you want to understand how things work, which we suppose that's what education means. Where did all the money come from to build this place, miss? And our caller, this was her story, starts prevaricating slightly, or talking about trade and business, and this sort of patrician voice behind her, sotto voce, so it sort of whispers, tell him it was slave plantations and state-sanctioned piracy. And she sort of said, "I can't tell him that, I'd lose my job." And he said, "Well, they can't sack me, I live here." And why is that so difficult to why can that... I mean, yeah, there might be people, you could probably find someone if you rang around often enough. We could get Archie Manners, Josh Peters to find someone to come on air and say, it's outrageous, we should be given the stately homes. You'll find people who call for that. I think there is a strong case for reparations, but I didn't even believe that until I learned how much money was given as compensation to actual plantation owners. Just that fella there, in his enormous stately home, fully aware of the bricks upon which it was built, fully aware of the absolute wrongness of where his ancestors' fortunes came from. Why do you not want to know that? If he's cool with it, if he's comfortable with it, why aren't you? And here we are, the Daily Mail today, 2 pages, explaining why Alton Towers is racist. Because it turns out that the stately home in the grounds of which Alton Towers currently resides, the theme park, you know, the fairground, the money that built the stately home in whose grounds the theme park today sits came from slave plantations and state-sanctioned piracy, among other things. Why is that an attack on your culture? That simple historical fact. And that's why I do what I do every day, because I'm sure if someone asks you the question in that way, rather than just carving it up and offering you a big chunk of red meat to get your teeth into, and to, of course, stick little plugs in your ears as well, because that's crucially important. You have to stop thinking. Someone just says to you, why is that knowledge bad? Why is that knowledge dangerous? How does understanding where the money came from to build a house constitute an attack upon the culture of people who live in the same country that the house was built in? I don't get it. I possibly never will. But as things stand, I can't imagine I'll ever stop asking. The statues, of course, the flipping statues. Sadiq Khan, the statue destroyer, or something like that. Last time he was in, I said to him, how many minutes a week, how many hours a week do you spend on statues? None. None whatsoever. He's appointed a panel, going to have a look at the statues. Some parts of town that might be better reflective of modern achievements or the population of 21st century London. So we're going to have a look at some of the statues. And that is apparently the end of civilization as we know it. Oh boy. We wondered what we were going to talk about after Brexit. Thomas is in Islington. Why do you care about this story, Thomas? And to be honest, after the way I've just wanged on for the last 15 minutes, you could be forgiven for having completely forgotten.
Hi, James. I think this story is quite, quite significant for where we are in Britain today. I think,
yeah, I do.
We can talk about the micro and the interviews and she said this, but let's look at the macro. I think the biggest reason why this is such a headline story is that it's challenging British exceptionalism. And so you can have all the commentators, all the analysts, come on TV and talk about she said this, she's this. But why people are feeling threatened is that she's challenging the institution, the system of the power structures, and anyone who does that, whether it's Raheem Sterling or Marcus Rashford, Meghan Markle, it could be. It's challenging the establishment.
I'm glad you chuckled, because one of us had to.
And I think that just basically, I think in this modern globalized world that we live in, people are feeling less and less relevant, less and less significant, and the idea of nationalism is a sense of pride and joy, which gives people some value, and so. Obviously, this is why it ties into Brexit and all these other discussions, which have been so polarizing over the last years. But I find that this story in particular is challenging the very heart of British exceptionalism and the pride and the source of joy to so many people. And so Meghan Markle is a threat to that. And she's speaking out, and people, quite frankly,
why is she? I mean, it seemed to me to be the case that. How could it have gone better for her? I guess the answer is, because when you use the word threat, people who haven't been following very closely will think she's done something really big, won't they? Or she's done something really awful or inflammatory or provocative, whereas all she really did was seek to live royal life on her, not entirely her own terms, but not entirely on their terms. That's all I can see that she's done wrong. I mean, is there anything about she's taken Harry away from us? Or I just don't get it. And usually you can see some light, can't you?
Yeah, but I think there's a fragility about the British identity. And, there's a very kind of, there's a certain ideology and image that we like to portray around the world, and this is challenging that. She is challenging the Queen, the establishment, that perfect image, and essentially, Britain is a wonderful multicultural international country.
Yes.
You know, there are many positive things. I'm a black African born and raised in London. You know, London is a phenomenal city. You know, I just think that what happens is that in this situation, we're holding up the mirror. We're showing an ugly side to the country or parts of our culture, which has got steeped in, you know, classism, racism, you know, privilege and whatnot. And ultimately, it's the fragility of many individuals being challenged and being brought out. And it's like it's troubling people. And so that's, I think, so it just happens to be Meghan. And in a month's time, it could be somebody else. And the same people, the same commentators will have exactly the same opinion because it's challenging the idea of Britain. And I think what we find today is that, you know, British history is, you know, very much, you know, it can be very much whitewashed in a certain way, which projects certain ideals of what we achieved and all this great stuff. But there's the negative aspects which have never really been challenged. And so anything which kind of, you know, could, you know, maybe make a, you know, a chink or a hole in the armor of the pomp and pageantry of our country is basically...
It's a mortal threat. It's a mortal threat. It becomes a mortal threat.
To everything. And so this is why I think certain people get so
you've just unlocked something for me. Because one of the things I find puzzling, as somebody does often get accused of hating my own country, I mean, leaving aside the mad end of it, but if you think that loving your country, I don't really have a problem with that as long as it isn't then I mean, I love my country. I've never lived anywhere else. I don't think I would ever want to live anywhere else, although I wouldn't mind maybe retiring to Greece for half the year, but we digress slightly. I think what you've just unlocked for me is the difference between love and infatuation, because if somebody loves you, they will tell you your faults. They will help you try. They will make you want to be a better person. They will also be very honest with you. If someone is infatuated with you, they will do none of those things. All they will ever do is blow smoke up your fundament, and sort of, you know, that's it, isn't it? So people who don't think there should be any criticism of anything to do with this country, whether it's statues of old wrong'uns that no one's ever heard of until someone pulls it down, or whether it's the Duchess of Sussex pointing out that really there's nothing about her sister-in-law, or her brother-in-law, or her mother-in-law, or her grandmother-in-law, there's nothing about, or stepmother-in-law, about these people that is fundamentally better than me just because of the order of whatever it is. People who are infatuated with their country, who have almost got like a teenage crush on a pop star and they think that that's somehow patriotism, they're the ones with the problem. You and me can sit here as two people who love living here and love being from here and love being, in your case, black African origins, in my case, kind of Irish origins, but I'm 100% British. I've got no problem with people explaining flaws in the history of these islands. I've got no problem with knowledge. I've got no problem with understanding. But if I was infatuated and insecure, I'd see it all. I'd see every syllable as a threat, an existential threat.
And just to, you know, maybe again, not to mention the war. This is obviously not the subject. You know, but
no, I didn't. You invaded Poland.
I spent a lot of time in Germany. I worked for a German company in the past, and I think, you know, the Germans, you know, wear with so much shame what happened in the Second World War.
Yes.
And it's part of the national psyche. So it is, you know, they're taught it in school. They understood, you know, how powerful Germany was, how much of an incredible country it was, but they did something really bad, and they wear it with shame. And it's almost like they had to look at the ugliness of their society
to see where it would lead,
and see where it would lead, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think in this country we've essentially never challenged any part of our negative aspects of our history.
2 World Wars, 1 World Cup.
Colonialism.
Yeah, we never hear about the 100-Year War or the Elector of Hanover or any of the encounters we had that didn't go well.
It's never been challenged. So I think And the thing is, it doesn't necessarily mean if you challenge it and you admit that actually we did do some things wrong, we have caused pain and suffering around the world. It doesn't make us any less of, human beings, or it doesn't take away from...
No, but do you know what it does?
British.
Do you know what it does? It makes us the same as other countries.
Well, exactly, and that's when I started off by saying British exceptionalism. It's
English.
It's English, and it's
that makes us the same. We can't cling to the idea that we're somehow anointed with special powers or special status. If you study about the British Empire versus the Ottoman Empire or the Belgian Empire in the so we need to feel special. I guess, like me, I feel special all the time. You're probably the same. I don't need a sanitized, fake version of history of the country in which I happened to be born to feel special. My parents made me feel special.
And ultimately, when we talk about racism, which I think is really more a symptom of classism.
Yeah, I do too, completely.
Always being, and essentially, it's the privilege card, right? So it's really, getting that access to the country club. And
well, how do you stop people going after the ones above them with their boots on their throats by telling them that the real danger is coming from below them with the people that are currently driving their buses or something?
Exactly. So, and if you want to change the rules to the privilege club, then you're basically threatening to bring down the entire institution or establishment of Britain. And it's obviously never going to happen. It's ridiculous. But some people, I think, are...
It's a fragility. You've used so many words that resonate. Fragility, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fragility. And it's non-existent. And this is why I think, for example, in many of your...
I'm going to have to hurry you. You've had an astonishing run at this, Thomas.
Yes. so many of times, in your Brexit debates with so many of your callers, you ask 2 or 3 questions and the whole debate just falls apart for so many people because all of those fears and threats, none of them are real. Yeah. None of them actually have any impact on their lives.
No.
And that's
one law.
What we've got to keep doing is just keep talking and hopefully educating people that things will, they're not challenged. Life isn't going to change. They can still have, pursuit of happiness and live wonderful lives. And, women of colour speaking out about their treatment doesn't affect their lives personally. It's not going to make their lives worse by being more inclusive.
Doesn't malign the memory of Sir Winston Churchill or indeed or any... Mate, I've got to crack on, but thank you for all of that. Fragility, because that's the problem I think that many of us have. It took me ages to work this out, and I had to recognise what I saw in my own mirror a bit. Sometimes the loudest voices, the biggest bullies perhaps, maybe, are actually nursing the deepest fragilities. So you don't see it as a fragility, you see it as an aggression. But actually, you find me someone, for example, who thinks that Donald Trump is the best thing since sliced bread and hates Meghan Markle, and I'll show you a deeply terrified man. But of course, the greater the terror, the louder the belligerence, the louder the insistence, the louder the bullying. And mentioning the war, as Thomas did, the Telegraph, which is, as you know, a paper whose decline has been as fast as it has been complete, is now running an article that says the saddest thing is that Wallace and Edward, despite being banished, were dutiful and patriotic to the end. Meghan and Harry, who took it upon themselves to leave Britain, seem unlikely to display similar loyalty to the Crown on Oprah tonight. Wallace and Edward, if you're not aware, that's Edward the 8th as was, and Mrs. Simpson, and Edward abdicated in order to continue his relationship with and get married to Mrs. Simpson, who was a divorcee. I don't know if we can call them out-and-out Nazis, but there's certainly photographs out there of Adolf Hitler kissing her hand, while the Duke of Windsor, as he became, looks on beamingly. And he's the fellow, of course, that taught the current Queen how to goose step. Those photographs emerged, I think the Daily Mirror got hold of them a few years ago. So here he is. You tell me things aren't getting worse. It's 2021. Daily Telegraph is carrying an article comparing Meghan and Harry to Nazi sympathisers and coming out on the side of the Nazi sympathisers. It's good to know I've still got the capacity to be shocked by the depths which the British media will plumb. Weird day, actually. I say this to you often, but some days it's even more true than it is on other days. Can one have gradations of veracity? I don't know. I'll check with Keith after the programme. I don't know where the day's gone, and we've only talked about one subject, and it's not a subject that at first glance I care much about, but at second, third, fourth, 17th glance, how many calls was Thomas into the show and just dropping truth bombs all over the programme? But my goodness me, that's why it's so huge, because they are so emblematic of bigger issues and broader landscapes. And sadly, the best way to describe them is culture war, where there's only one side in the culture war, the people who insist that their freedoms are under attack or their culture is under siege or they're not allowed to say what they want to say. They're on one side in the culture war, and then there's everybody else who thinks they're talking twaddle. But of course, the longer it goes on, as we've seen with all of these projects, whether it's Trump or Farage or Brexit, the more oxygen they're given, and the longer it goes on, the more people are persuaded that they should take up arms in order to fight against what's on. So I can see it all now unfolding in front of us. People care more about statues than they do about actual people who are alive. And I don't know how to stop it. I suppose I can console myself yet again with the thought that it's good for business. But it's not great for human relations, or indeed, in the case of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, clearly mental health. And indeed the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. I mean, don't forget that they'll be reading this stuff and following this stuff and also feeling a great toll upon their mental health. Because that's what toxicity does, that's what hate does, that's what poison does. And that's why it's so lucrative. David is in Ruislip. David, why do you care?
Well, basically, you mentioned Pontins.
I did, yes.
And
very briefly.
I've had racism because of my Irish background virtually throughout my life, but my name is not on the Pontins list. My surname, and also
what sort of racism have you encountered? I'm not being sceptical. I just recognising
in this country, you papists should be back where you came from.
I came across a little bit of that back in the day.
I had a lot.
But not recently.
My very first friend, when I was 8 years old, was the son of a Polish RAF pilot.
I thought you were going to say preacher man then.
And he was always being told to go back to Poland, where he belongs.
Even though his dad had been a Spitfire pilot.
Yeah. But also, right at the end, you mentioned the person who was voted the greatest Briton.
Yes.
Winston Churchill.
Yes.
Who was also a racist, who was also the man who employed all of the English soldiers who were Protestants and sent the black and tans across into Ireland. So there's racism there. I spent 16 years...
He also defeated the Nazis. I don't understand why people have not single-handedly, but he led. Well, you don't have to go that far. You can say that he led the UK, he led Great Britain in the Second World War.
The Empire.
And Great Britain prevailed. No, because sometimes I worry that people perhaps understandably go too far in the other direction. So Churchill is a flawed and complex character. But if you look at the 1930s, the support for the Nazis, we just mentioned the Duke of Windsor a minute ago, who's getting bigged up in the Daily Telegraph today for being patriotic while his wife was being charmed by Hitler himself. You can't have it both ways. Churchill took on many of his own class. The support for the Nazis among the aristocrats in this country in the 30s is one of the dirtiest secrets that the country has. Not just the ones that owned actual newspapers, but the ones that were sort of quietly approving of the notion of white supremacism or Aryan supremacism because they thought they were on the right side of it. But briefly, and I feel for you on the Irish racism, you see yourself in Meghan Markle?
To a certain extent.
Fair enough.
I did spend 16 years of my life as a professional DJ.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I might have to wait for the autobiography to find out more about this. Just a sentence on
two occasions, nightclubs that were owned by white people.
Right.
One of them only allowed black people in.
Yes.
And drugs were sold on the premises, and they exploited them left, right and centre.
And this is what came careering to the front of your mind as you watched the interview with Meghan Markle and
then
okay, well, takes all sorts.
The other club didn't allow black people in unless they were close friends of a current member.
Right. Okay.
So that was institutionalized racism inside the entertainment.
Indeed. I guess it was a while ago, but what you were reminded of watching that interview was The fact that it just assumes a different cloak, it puts on different clothes, but the problem remains the same. Should I squeeze in one more? I think I've inflicted enough of my pontifications upon you today, but let me apologise before I do to Pearl and to Lindo and to Richard and to Kerry and to Arthur and to, not to Samira, she's next, but to Michael, to Andy, to Stuart and to David and to everyone else who's complaining about not being able to get through. It's not my fault. Samira is in Chelsea. I can give you a minute, Samira. Make it sing.
Okay. I'm racist.
Okay.
Against my own kind.
Right.
Or I was. Thankfully, I've been re-educated.
I can't believe I've only got a minute left. That's like the mother of all bombshells with which to open a call. Give me the edited highlights.
Basically, I'm mixed race, so
Yes.
I've seen it from both sides. But unfortunately, when I was young, I only saw it from the African side because we used to live between Africa and here.
Yes.
So in Africa, I was white. Obviously, I got a lot of racism. But here, obviously, I went to boarding school and the circles I was in, I never saw the racism.
Right.
So for me, and my own father, who's black African,
Yes.
was like, you will not learn your language or your culture because it's a slave language.
Okay.
Now, I can only assume it's because he came here, like 50s and 60s, to study medicine and be a surgeon. So he knew, obviously that he had to fit in. And, I was groomed to be racist against my own kind. It didn't really help that I was actually abused by black couples when I was young. So the fear was there. And it was only when I was super lucky to run away from my family, I joined the army as a private, and I got racism from all the whites. And it was only then that I used to laugh at them anyway, because in my head I was white.
Right.
So it didn't really affect me. But it then made me see, oh my goodness, and my mental health. I was obviously suicidal from my childhood trauma, and then the trauma of I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm Roman Catholic. Do I drop that? Do I, what do I do? And to this day, it's still really hard for me, and I don't really socialise because of it. But thankfully, I literally had to re-educate myself and go and follow people on Instagram and Twitter and look at black art, because it was that offensive to me. I couldn't look at it.
That is one of the most incredible stories I think I've ever heard. And Sheila very graciously gave me some extra time to talk to you, but I do hope we talk again. I'd love to explore some of this a little further, because as a very wise man once wrote, there is no point having a mind if you never change it. All right, it wasn't a very wise man, wasn't it?